Hello, glad to see you on the channel. Subscribe, leave a like, and don't forget to write a comment. Enjoy watching.
The last thing I took from that house was a spoon. Not out of necessity, not as some grand symbolic gesture I planned in advance, but because in that exact moment, standing beside the chipped sink where I'd rinsed more dishes than I could ever count, my mother had looked me straight in the eye, handed that same spoon to my sister, and said with a smile so sweet it could rot your teeth, "You'll always be second best, Rachel, but at least you're good at cleaning up." And maybe the most devastating part wasn't the words themselves. I'd heard worse from her, sometimes whispered, sometimes shouted, but the way everyone at the table laughed. Not loud, not mockingly, just politely, awkwardly, like they knew it was a joke meant to land only on me, like they'd been to this play before and already knew their lines. Emily would smile and say, "Oh, Mom." Dad would grunt and focus on his mashed potatoes, and I would do what I always did, nod, clench my teeth, and carry the dishes away like the reliable, invisible mule I had always been. But not this time. That Sunday dinner, the one we'd all pretended was for Mom's 69th birthday, felt like a stage set I no longer had the energy to perform in. The wine was cheap, the roast was dry, and the compliments, as usual, were reserved for Emily, the sister who could burn toast and still be called brilliant, who could show up an hour late and be in demand, who had two loud kids with no manners and was somehow the perfect mother, who never remembered anyone's birthday, but always received the most thoughtful gifts. I, meanwhile, had arrived early with a store-bought cheesecake that no one touched, wore a dress that Mom said made me look tired, and brought up a new client at work, only for my dad to respond with, "Still doing that consulting thing?" As if I hadn't built a business from the ground up with no support from anyone at that table. That dining room, with its dull yellow lighting and walls still covered in cross-stitch quotes about family and grace, felt more like a trap than a home. When Emily opened her gift, a small box wrapped in gold ribbon, clearly expensive, and pulled out our grandmother's antique ruby brooch, the one Mom had always said was meant for the daughter who shows she's capable of carrying on tradition, I didn't say a word. I didn't flinch. I didn't even breathe funny. I just stood up, walked to the kitchen, and started clearing plates. That was the moment she came in behind me, handed me the spoon, and gave me that line, like she was passing down a family curse rather than a utensil. My fingers closed around the spoon. I felt the chill of the metal, the dull weight of it, and something in me just shifted, not snapped. Snapping would imply noise, drama, confrontation. This was quieter, deeper, a tectonic plate of emotion that had been grinding for 42 years and had finally decided it was done. I rinsed that spoon with quiet precision, dried it with the dish towel I'd brought from home because Mom's were always stiff and stained, and tucked it into my purse without looking around. I didn't announce my departure. I didn't hug anyone. I just picked up my bag, walked through the front hall, past the collage of family photos that never once included me in the center, and stepped outside into the night without once turning back. The air smelled like dry leaves and overcooked beef. The wind stung my face just enough to remind me I was still here, still real, and for the first time in a long time, I felt light, like someone had untied the lead apron I didn't realize I'd been wearing for decades. I drove home with the radio off. I didn't want noise. I wanted space. I wanted to feel what it was like to make a decision that didn't require anyone's permission or approval. I thought of all the dinners before this one, all the birthdays where I brought the candles but didn't get a slice, all the holidays where I stayed late to clean because Emily had a long drive. I thought about how, when I got promoted at 38, Mom had said, "Well, at least now you can afford to freeze your eggs," and how Emily had laughed like it was charming and not cruel. I thought about the time I got into a car accident and lay in the hospital alone while my parents were on a cruise with Emily's family, because Rachel can manage herself. I managed everything. I was the one who remembered appointments, who mailed the Christmas cards, who called Mom every Sunday even when she pretended she was too busy to talk. But that night, I didn't call. Instead, I opened my laptop and wrote a letter, just 4 words. "You'll miss me quietly." I printed it, folded it carefully, and placed it in an envelope. The next morning, I walked to the post office and dropped it in the mail, addressed to my mother, written in my neatest cursive. No return address, no explanation, just the certainty that she'd know exactly what it meant. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't asking to be seen. I was choosing to disappear. Not dramatically, not cruelly, just absolutely. That afternoon, I blocked every number I needed to. My mother's, my father's, even Emily's, though hers took an extra minute. I paused over her contact photo, a beach selfie from 5 years ago, her tan, freckled face laughing in sunlight I barely remembered, and deleted it. Then I turned my phone face down, closed my laptop, and made myself a cup of tea using the spoon I had taken. It was tarnished. It left a faint metallic taste in the tea. I didn't mind. What surprised me was how quickly the silence felt like peace. It's strange how loud the world becomes when you remove even a few voices that once filled every corner of your life. Not because they were kind or comforting or supportive, but because they were constant, like a background hum you forgot you'd learned to tolerate. The day after I sent the letter and shut down my phone, the silence didn't feel like an empty room, but more like a locked door behind me, one I didn't intend to open again, no matter how many times someone knocked. I thought I might feel guilt, that fluttering, hot stomach kind that always followed me after family events when I'd say the wrong thing or not smile enough or speak too confidently. But instead, I felt this slow, unfolding quiet, like a muscle unclenching in my chest, that I hadn't realized had been cramped for years. I didn't answer texts. I didn't open emails from anyone I didn't trust completely, and I didn't post a single thing online. For the first time in decades, I wasn't performing. Not for Mom, not for Emily, not even for the extended family who always seemed to think I was doing fine, because I never made a scene. I was tired of pretending that I wasn't hurt. Every time I got excluded from a family decision or reminded of how Emily just needs more support right now, because apparently, the more you fall apart in front of people, the more they gather around you to help put the pieces back. I never fell apart. I learned to do that alone, in bathroom stalls, in traffic, in the grocery store parking lot. And I cleaned it all up before anyone noticed. The first week, I reorganized my apartment. Not just a spring cleaning kind of thing, but a full purge. I donated the dishes my mom gave me when I got my first job. The scratchy wool blanket from her attic she insisted I borrow when I moved out. And every single framed photo of our family that made it look like we had something even close to warmth. I replaced them with prints I liked, books I hadn't let myself read, and a few ridiculous things I'd always admired, but thought were too impractical, like a neon sign above my desk that just says, "No one's watching, breathe." It made me laugh when I plugged it in. Not because it was funny, but because it was exactly what I needed to hear, and for once, I didn't need to apologize for needing anything at all. I took on a few more clients at work. Not because I had to, but because I finally had the bandwidth, mentally and emotionally, to say yes to things without wondering how I'd squeeze them in between family drama or last-minute guilt trips about Sunday brunch. I started eating better. I slept without grinding my teeth. I stopped clenching my jaw so hard that I'd wake up with a headache. And one morning, halfway through making coffee, I realized I hadn't thought about Emily or my mom in almost 48 hours. A personal record I didn't know I was keeping. But of course, the silence doesn't stay perfect forever. It was a Thursday afternoon when my phone rang from an unknown number. Local area code, nothing unusual, and I almost didn't answer, but something in me wanted to know if it was a work call I'd forgotten to save. I let it go to voicemail anyway, and a few minutes later, I saw the little red dot appear. One message. I stared at it longer than I'd like to admit. Thumb hovering, chest already tightening in anticipation of some version of obligation disguised as concern. When I finally pressed play, the voice that came through wasn't my mother's, but Emily's. And it wasn't cheerful or casual like her usual messages. It was tight, panicked, fractured in a way that made something sharp twist behind my ribs. "Rachel, please call me. I don't know what happened, but Mom can't stop crying. She hasn't left her room in 2 days. She won't eat. She just keeps reading that stupid note over and over again. Please call me. That was it. No love you, no explanation, no apology. I stood there for a long time after the message ended, still holding the phone in my hand, not because I was tempted to call her back, I wasn't, but because something about the message felt off. Not rehearsed exactly, but incomplete. Emily wasn't someone who asked for anything without also including some implied guilt or defensive excuse. And yet here she was, suddenly vulnerable, desperate, maybe even sincere. And that scared me more than if she'd been angry. Because when someone who's spent their whole life pretending you're the problem finally admits something's wrong, it usually means you've done something they can't undo. I didn't respond. I blocked the number, just as calmly as I had the first time. And then I poured myself a second cup of coffee and sat on the balcony, watching the late spring wind tug at the trees like it was trying to tell them something urgent. I wondered what my mother looked like crying over that letter, not because I wanted to see her in pain, but because it was such a foreign image I couldn't quite picture it. I had cried in front of her dozens of times over the years, not dramatically, just softly, in those moments where a daughter reaches out not for pity, but for basic recognition. And every time she had looked at me like I was inconveniencing her day. I didn't believe for a second that she missed me as a person. What she missed was the convenience of me. The fixer, the cleaner, the backup plan, when Emily forgot to RSVP, or needed someone to babysit, or couldn't find anyone to pick up the dry cleaning before the wedding. She missed the role I played, not the woman I was. Still, I couldn't help but wonder what had finally broken her. Was it the silence, the absence, the loss of control? Or was it the spoon? That small, cold relic she never noticed was gone until it was missing from the drawer. A reminder that sometimes the smallest things carry the biggest messages when they're no longer where you expect them to be. 3 weeks passed, not a single message since, no knock at my door, no email, no cousin chiming in with updates, just silence. And I was beginning to think that maybe, just maybe, silence was the revenge I didn't know. I had the power to choose. There's a certain kind of satisfaction that doesn't come with gloating or confrontation or even recognition. It grows quietly, steadily, in the absence of noise, in the quiet after you've stopped explaining yourself, stopped begging to be seen, stopped auditioning for a role you never even wanted but were told, over and over, was yours to carry simply because no one else would do it. That's the kind of satisfaction I found myself drifting into by the start of the 3rd week. And though I would never call it happiness in the traditional saccharine sense, it was a calm I hadn't known I could claim, like I'd stumbled upon a room in my own mind that had always been locked from the inside, and now the door had finally clicked open. It was a Sunday, the kind of golden, windless spring morning that usually made my mother post syrupy Bible quotes on Facebook, under stock photos of cherry blossoms and sunrises. And for reasons I still can't explain, I found myself getting dressed in something soft and neutral, pulling my hair into a low knot and driving not toward anything in particular, but with the half intention of seeing for myself whether the silence I had created had left a mark I could feel from a distance. I didn't park in the driveway, didn't walk up to the front door, didn't call or knock or give warning. Instead, I circled my old neighborhood until the curve of the street turned familiar again, then eased to a stop across from the church we'd gone to every Easter for 30 years. The one where my mother volunteered at the welcome table with a smile she reserved only for strangers. The one where I used to sit 2 pews behind her and wonder how a woman so cold at home could warm to the world so effortlessly in public. From where I sat, I could see the congregation trickling in, families in matching pastels, bored husbands in too tight collars, women clutching coffee like holy water. And then, finally, I saw her, my mother walking slower than I remembered, her posture smaller, shoulders drawn in like the weight of something invisible had finally begun pressing down with more force than she knew how to resist. She wore her usual beige trench coat, the one she'd had tailored back when image was everything and looking tired was a kind of social failure. But even from across the street, I could tell it hung looser now, like her body had deflated around it. She didn't smile at anyone. She didn't stop to chat. She just walked, head down, as if she were trying to slip inside without being noticed, as if the walls themselves had questions she didn't want to answer. I sat there in the car for nearly 40 minutes, not moving, not blinking much, just watching. Not out of cruelty or some petty hope of seeing her suffer, but because for once, I needed proof that the absence of my presence had finally registered in her carefully curated world. The one where everything was always about Emily, where Rachel was a footnote, a servant, a fallback plan. And watching her shuffle into that church, hunched and silent and alone, was as close to that proof as I was ever going to get. Later that evening, just as the sky was turning that murky shade of gray-blue that always made me feel slightly disconnected from time, a message popped up in my inbox from my cousin Mara, someone I hadn't spoken to in over a year, not because of anything personal, but because our relationship had always been built around holidays and mutual tolerance more than any real connection. The subject line simply read, "Have you talked to your mom?" And the body was only one sentence long. She's not herself lately. She looks like a ghost and won't talk about anything but a letter and a spoon. I read it 3 times. I didn't respond. Instead, I stood up from my desk, walked over to the small drawer in my kitchen where I kept odds and ends, rubber bands, charger cables, expired coupons, and took out the second spoon. Yes, there were 2. I had taken them both, not because I needed matching utensils, but because I knew her well enough to predict that when she realized one was missing, she'd assume it was misplaced or miscounted, maybe even lost to the garbage disposal. But when the second one vanished, and when it appeared days later in a padded envelope with no return address, wrapped in one of her own monogrammed napkins, and accompanied by a small square card that read, "In tidy script, for teaching me my worth," I knew it would hit differently. I mailed it the next morning. I didn't put my name on it. I didn't add a note or a phone number or even a location. I wanted her to feel the absence, not chase it. I wanted her to sit in that kitchen where I'd spent most of my adult life scrubbing plates while she praised Emily for buying pre-made cupcakes, and look at that silver spoon as if it were a riddle she suddenly didn't know how to solve. It didn't take long for the fallout to start. By Wednesday, someone had taken down one of her cheery Facebook banners and replaced it with a blurry photo of a vase of dying tulips and a caption that read, "You never know what you had until it stops picking up your calls." No tags, no comments, just that. The next day I deleted my account entirely, and maybe that's when I started to understand that revenge, real revenge, the kind that doesn't shout, doesn't destroy, doesn't demand applause, isn't always about proving someone wrong or even making them hurt. Sometimes it's about removing the oxygen from a room so slowly that the people left inside don't realize they can't breathe until they're gasping. That night, I took a walk through the park near my building, where the lamps hum softly and the trees bend like old men in conversation with the sky, and I wondered, briefly and then not at all, if I'd gone too far. But the truth was I hadn't gone far enough for most of my life. I had stayed, I had served, I had smiled when I wanted to scream. And if silence was my weapon now, then I would wield it like a blade made of velvet, soft on the outside, but sharp enough to cut clean. When I got home, I lit a candle not for prayer, not for her, but for myself. A small ritual of light, not mourning. Because this wasn't a funeral, even if it felt like one. It was the beginning of something quieter, sharper, and far more permanent. When someone who's built her entire identity around being adored finally feels the edges of that attention fray and collapse. It doesn't happen all at once like a window shattering in a storm. It happens in tiny, unremarkable fractures, quiet cracks that deepen beneath the surface until the whole structure, once so smug in its symmetry, begins to sag under the weight of its own delusion. I didn't expect Emily to show up in person, certainly not at my office, and absolutely not without her usual polished veneer. The blow-dried hair, the click of confident heels, the crisp blazer that always seemed just a touch too expensive for what she actually did. which, as far as I could tell, was exist under a cloud of unearned praise and wide-eyed gratitude for things she barely understood. But when the front desk buzzed me and said, "There's a woman here. She says she's your sister, and she seems upset," I knew something had finally shifted in the axis of our family's closed-loop solar system. Something big enough to send her spiraling out of orbit. Something raw enough to crack through the thick shell of her curated, Instagrammable life. I met her in the lobby because I didn't want her in my space, not in the office I'd built with my own damn spine, not in the quiet sanctuary where I finally felt like I mattered on my own terms. And when I saw her, standing by the window, wringing her hands like someone who'd just been told a terrible secret but didn't know whether to whisper it or scream, I felt something flicker inside me. Not compassion exactly, but recognition, like watching a mirror warp in real time and show you what could have been if you hadn't taken the sharp turn when you did. Her face was blotchy, eyes swollen, mascara clinging to her lashes in little black veins, like something had unraveled her from the inside. And for a moment, just one brief, flickering second, I remembered being 8 years old and holding her hand at our grandfather's funeral while she whispered that she was scared of dead people, and I told her I'd protect her. That little girl was gone, long gone, buried beneath decades of being the chosen one, the favorite, the golden child who never had to lift a finger because I was always there to hold the weight she never acknowledged. "Rachel," she said, her voice cracking in a way I'd never heard before, a kind of vulnerability that sounded so foreign coming from her mouth, I almost didn't believe it was real. "I don't know what you did or why you're doing this, but she's not okay." I didn't answer right away. I let the silence stretch between us like a rope neither of us wanted to pull. And when I finally spoke, my voice came out steady, even, like it had been waiting for this exact moment. "I didn't do anything," I said. "That's the whole point." She blinked, confused, and I could see the flicker of resistance rising, the old patterns clawing their way back to the surface. The reflex to defend, to deflect, to diminish what didn't fit the narrative she'd grown so comfortable repeating. But she didn't say what I expected. She didn't accuse or deflect or pull out the tired, "you're just jealous" line she'd used since we were teenagers. Instead, she dropped into the chair across from me in the waiting area, hands trembling in her lap, and said, "She hasn't eaten in 4 days. She won't leave her room. She just keeps staring at that spoon and reading your letter," she said. "She said she can't stop seeing you walk out the door." Still, I said nothing, 'cause what was there to say? She looked at me then, really looked at me, as if she were trying to see past whatever mask she'd imagined I wore all these years. The bitter one, the resentful one, the one she and Mom had invented to explain away my silence. And when she didn't find what she expected, she softened in a way that almost made me ache. "She's not eating, Rachel," Emily said again, quieter this time. I've never seen her like this. I leaned back, crossed my arms, and studied her. Not with contempt, but with a kind of forensic interest. Like I was piecing together a puzzle I hadn't realized had been missing a corner. "I spent most of my 20s skipping meals because Mom said I was getting too comfortable," I said slowly. "I once passed out in a dressing room after a family brunch because I hadn't eaten in 2 days trying to look put together enough for her to stop comparing me to you. So forgive me if her appetite doesn't break my heart." Emily flinched, and I saw it land. Not just the words, but the years behind them. The entire weight of a history she had never bothered to ask about because it had never served her to know. "I didn't know," she whispered, and maybe for the first time in her life she meant it. "No," I said, "you didn't. Because you never asked. Because it was easier to let me be the one who held the guilt and the silence while you played the part of the good daughter." She reached into her bag then, pulled out a small envelope, cream-colored, heavy, familiar, and held it out like a peace offering she didn't know how to deliver. "She wrote you a letter," she said. "I didn't read it, I swear, but she's different. I don't know if this is about the spoon or the letter or just everything catching up to her, but she keeps saying your name like she's trying to call you back." I didn't take it, not right away. Instead, I looked her in the eyes and said, If you really want to help her, give her this. And I reached into my own bag, pulled out a sealed envelope I'd written 2 nights ago after lying awake until 3 in the morning, turning over every memory like a stone looking for the one that still had blood on it. I handed it to Emily, who took it without asking what it said. "What's in it?" she asked. "You'll find out if she shows it to you," I said, but I wouldn't hold your breath. She stood then, and for a moment, I thought she might say something else, might beg or apologize, or ask me to come back for a family dinner like nothing had happened. But she just looked at me with a face I didn't recognize. Not smug, not broken, but uncertain, like someone realizing the map they'd been following their whole life was actually upside down. When she left, she didn't hug me, and I didn't watch her go. Instead, I walked back to my office, shut the door, and sat down in the chair where I'd made 1,000 decisions for other people's businesses, other people's futures, and for once, felt like I'd made the right one for myself. Because sometimes, the most powerful thing you can say is nothing at all. The envelope she handed me was soft from being touched too many times, the corners slightly frayed, the seal worn but still intact, like it had traveled not just physically from her house to mine, but emotionally through a terrain so raw and unfamiliar, it had left fingerprints of grief along its edges. For 3 days, it sat unopened on my kitchen counter, beside a bowl of oranges I kept meaning to eat, but never quite reached for. And every time I passed it, some part of me tightened, not from curiosity or dread, but from the quiet knowledge that whatever lived inside those folds wasn't going to be a confession or an apology or some sudden, miraculous rewriting of history. It would be something else, something smaller and messier, probably intended to repair a bridge already crumbled beyond repair, and I didn't know if I had it in me to walk across ruins just to tell her I didn't need what she was finally trying to give. But on the 4th morning, sometime just after the sky began to pale and the street outside had gone still, I poured myself a cup of coffee, sat down in the corner chair by the window where the sun hit hardest, and opened it without ceremony. The paper inside was the same kind she used for holiday letters. Ivory, thick, embossed at the top with her name in gold script like a branding iron, meant to remind the reader who they were dealing with. But the handwriting was smaller than usual, almost unsure, like she'd rehearsed every word and then still wasn't convinced of them as they hit the page. She began, unsurprisingly, without a greeting. No dear Rachel, no my daughter, just the words, "I keep thinking about the way you looked when you walked out." Not angry, not sad, just done, like someone who'd stopped waiting for a bus that was never going to come. She went on from there, not quite an apology, but a series of acknowledgments, some more raw than I'd expected, others frustratingly vague, as if naming specifics would still be giving me too much power. She admitted she didn't know when she had started favoring Emily, or why it had become so easy to lean on me while pretending I wasn't being leaned on at all. She wrote that she used to tell herself I didn't need as much because I was strong, capable, low maintenance. Words she now understood were just polite synonyms for invisible. She remembered the time I got pneumonia in college and didn't come home because she told me not to miss class. She remembered Christmas when I was 15 and got a C in geometry, and how she made me sit through dinner without speaking because disappointment shouldn't take up space. She said she didn't think those things mattered then, and now she wasn't sure she'd ever understand why they hadn't felt cruel at the time. And then she said something I didn't expect. When I gave Emily the brooch, I thought I was protecting tradition. I didn't realize until later that I was breaking something older than that, something in you I didn't know how to see because I didn't want to look. There were no tears in me as I read, no sudden forgiveness rising like a wave, just a kind of heavy, silent comprehension that this was a woman finally seeing the fire, after the house had already burned down. I didn't need her letter to know she regretted something. I could tell from the voicemails, from the silence that followed, from Emily shaking hands as she passed the envelope like it was radioactive. But seeing the words on the page made it real in a way nothing else could have. Real and somehow too late. She ended the letter with a line so simple it landed harder than the rest. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was human in a way she had never allowed herself to be. I never thought you'd leave. I thought you'd always need me, even if you hated me. I was wrong, and now I don't know how to miss you the right way. I folded the letter back into its envelope and put it in the drawer beside my bed. Not to keep it close, not to revisit it, but because throwing it away felt like pretending it never happened. And I didn't want to erase her words. I just didn't want to carry them anymore. Later that afternoon, I got another message from Emily. Just a text, nothing dramatic, no punctuation, no guilt. It read, "She's writing again, says it helps, she keeps mentioning you." I stared at it for a long time, then locked my phone without replying. Because in the space between her writing and my silence, something new had begun to form. Not reconciliation, not healing, but distance wide enough for me to finally breathe without flinching. I didn't need to know what else she was writing. I didn't need to know if she meant it or if it would last. I didn't need to go back, not even for closure. I went for a walk instead, the kind that meanders without purpose, the kind that feels like choosing yourself with every step. And somewhere between the corner bookstore and the cafe I used to pass but never entered, I found myself smiling, not from joy, not even from relief, but from the clarity that I had once begged for scraps of affection from a woman who hadn't known how to love me. And now she was whispering my name into a room where I no longer sat. I had become the ghost she couldn't stop calling for, and I was finally free not to answer.